Hey guys, today we're going to be installing a H&R Touring Cup Kit suspension package on this 2001 E46 wagon. I'm going to go ahead and insert a picture of the stock ride height now. And then, knowing what our reference point was, I'm going to go ahead and take some measurements off of the garage floor to the fender. My garage floor is pretty level, and I'm going to use it as the same measuring point before and after, so it should give us a pretty good reference. So I'm going to go ahead and take these before measurements. We'll take a look at the components that the kit comes with. I did get the full kit, so it comes with 4 springs and shocks for the back, struts for the front. So we'll go ahead and take our measurements, take a look at those components, and then we'll start with the rear and move on to the front after that. Alright, so here we have the driver's side rear. It is 25 1/4. The driver's side front, this is funny, considerably higher at 25 7/8. Passenger side front, 25 5/8. And then finally the passenger side rear is 25 1/8. Having the suspension before measurements, now we can go ahead and take a look at the components that come in the kit. You can see 2 front struts. Here's the 2 front springs. We got 2 rear shocks and then 2 rear springs. And this is what I said, I ordered some new front strut top mounts and then some new bump stops. May have to modify the bump stops a little bit due to the lower ride height, but I'll take some measurements and see how much I need to take out of there. These spring rates, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's about 50% more rate. So my hope is to alleviate some of the body roll. Ultimately, sway bars will help a ton due to, I don't want the ride height too low, and the center of gravity still won't be, as low as the H&R Sport package, but the Touring kit is recommended for the wagons just due to the little bit of added weight in the rear. As you can see, I've already done some disassembly back here to remove the rear shocks. On the wagons, you're going to have a little bit more difficulty than the sedans just to the way the trim pieces work back here. What you're going to need to do first, I just went ahead and removed the spare tire cover and everything. I don't know that that's necessarily required, but it did help to remove these 2 little plastic nuts down here so that I could lift this rear carpet up a little bit. So if you have the rear hatch cover stuff, you need to press the 2 little release buttons on there, take those out, of course remove the rear carpet area. So as far as the trim pieces go, you need to remove this guy first, which is a couple of Phillips screws in here, and then I believe this one is in there. You can just pull it out of the way. It just handles that light. So pull it out of the way. There's a couple of Phillips screws up here. You remove that this top piece here. The shock or the seatbelt cover, you just pull up pretty hard on it and it'll pop off. There's a 10mm right here. It's actually a 10mm hex. To remove this, the rear hatch cover latches, to remove those, they are T25 Torx. There's 2 of them down in there, and then you should be able to have enough room to lift this insulation back out of the way to get to the 2 13mm nuts that are on top of the actual shock. I've loosened the 18mm bottom shock mount and removed the shock. As you can see here, this is the factory bump stop. It's completely deteriorated. It just falls apart in my hand. So I am glad that I ordered new ones of those. The top hats look in great condition. E46 guys know that these cars are a little prone to rusting out in the back. This car luckily was a Southern car its whole life, and everything seems to be in great condition under there. The wagons were a little less susceptible to the rusting out issues. So now what we got to do is remove this upper shock mount, get it moved over to the new shock with the new bump stop. But before all that, now that we have both shocks loose underneath the rear, we should be able to push down on the wheel a good bit and pop the spring out of there. Let's go ahead and try that. I went ahead and removed the rear wheel to make it easier to get the spring out. I think that you could possibly do it with the wheel on there, but much easier to do it this way. I used a large pry bar to pry down on the control arm, and then was able to pull the spring out. I am going to reuse both of these rubber isolators for the spring on the new one, so we'll just pop those out of the old spring and then get them on the new one, and then we'll go ahead and try to get it in the new spring in the car. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the new H&R spring versus the factory. Right away you can see a little bit of a drop and the progressive rate of the new spring. Here you can see the new spring is installed. This one, due to the stiffer rate, was definitely a little bit more of an adventure to get in there. I think it would help a little bit if I disconnected the sway bar. The other side is off the ground, but I was able to get it in there with a little bit of help, and the sway bar still connected. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the other side. I have to remove the interior trim panels, and I'm not going to install the shocks until both springs are in, due to them limiting the droop of the suspension. The passenger side rear disassembly is about the same, minus the battery box cover. You just lift that up out of the way. Again, the 10mm up there, a few Phillips back here, slide that out of the way, pop the top trim piece off, pop the seatbelt trim off, and then you can remove the side carpeting area. There's a clip here on this battery cable. You can just, if you have a trim removal tool, you can pop that out, and then again fold the damping, the sound deadening material out of the way, and you can get to those top 13mm nuts. I've gone ahead and started the shocks on the bottom on both sides. I did go ahead and cut down the bump stop a little bit. Just there's no need for all of it, and in case it's lower than anticipated, I won't have to worry about just living on the bump stops. So I started the bottom bolts, have the jack here, jacking it up to where the top of the mount is through. I'm going to go ahead and throw the nuts on that top mount. I'm going to do that for both sides, and then we should be able to get it back on the ground. It's now the next day, but you can see here we've got the full interior put back together, and did go ahead and put it on the ground. I can just visibly see a difference. So again, that's the rear springs and the rear shocks completed. The front, you can see considerable gap there, and now the rear on these is a little bit lower anyway, but that's a decent amount of drop. I don't want to measure it yet until we get all four corners done, but now that the rear is all buttoned up and sitting on the ground, we can go ahead and move to the front. The front's pretty straightforward. You need to go ahead and remove the wheel, and then the first thing I did, you can tell I already have this strut assembly installed, but first thing you need to do is remove these little brake lines. One's a wear sensor, one's an ABS sensor, and one is the brake line. You go ahead and pop those out of this little clip here, remove this sway bar end link, and then once those are removed, there's I believe this is an 18mm. It actually pinches the bottom of the strut. You can remove it, come up to the top, remove these three, and the strut assembly will fall out the bottom. Once you get it onto the ground, you need to use some kind of spring compressors. If you have the the like one-piece type, you can use those. I happen to have these two-piece type, and so you can use that to compress the spring. Remove this top hat. Here's the new spring. Or that's, I'm sorry, the old spring. Let me get the new spring real quick. So there, I mean, because of the way this is a progressive spring rate, the heights are going to be different just because there are different designs on the spring anyway, but you can see a considerable height difference here. So like I said, I already have this side done, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the other side, and it's just a repeat of the process that I just went over on this side. Now what I am doing while I'm in here is this little, I think it's called a crash stud or something, but the top of the strut, these are slotted. Well, this stud would stick up through here. If you go ahead and grind that stud off, you can slide the strut all the way in, and effectively giving you a little bit more camber. So that's totally optional, but it's something that I did opt to do. Both sides have been completed. I think versus that clip you saw just a second ago, you can definitely tell that this front gap is down a good bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and go around and take the measurements, and we'll see where we're at after that. Here's the driver's side front. It is now 24 1/8. Go to the driver's rear, 24 1/8. You know, dropped the front considerably. I think we were at 25 7/8 before. 24 3/8. 24 3/8. So this side is the side that I did last, and I may have not settled it quite the same, but that's the install complete. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to comment down below, and thanks for watching.